The galaxy had always been a place of mystery, where untold dangers lurked in the shadows of uncharted worlds. Among the most fearsome of these dangers were the apex predators, a class of creatures known across the stars for their brutal strength, intelligence, and terrifying capabilities. These beings ruled their home planets with iron claws, often killing anything that ventured too close. Warships had been built just to avoid the deadly creatures and their territories. The apex predators were at the top of the food chain, feared, and respected by all who knew of them. Yet, despite their dominance, something happened that no one expected. One of these creatures reached out for help. The communication came from Vordak Prime, a world filled with immense, savage beasts with sharp claws, teeth, and instincts that made them nearly invincible. No one had ever dared to explore Vordak Prime, and those who tried had never returned. What did it mean, then, when a message was sent to Earth asking for help? The transmission was simple but chilling. "We trust humans. Send one caretaker. Our young need you." The words puzzled everyone in the United Human Federation. For generations, humanity had avoided crossing paths with the apex predators. No one had even considered the possibility of such creatures needing assistance. To even think of sending a human to a planet where the world's most deadly beings resided was a risk beyond imagination. At first, many believed it was a trap, an elaborate hoax or a trick to lure humans into an ambush. The transmission, however, was authentic. Despite the unsettling message, there was something undeniable about it. It had been sent not by the apex predators themselves, but by one of their own kind. The message contained a strange form of urgency, and the creatures were not making threats. They were making a plea. The request was clear, though still unfathomable. The apex predators were in trouble. Their young were in danger, and they needed human help. For weeks, the Federation sat in deliberation, unsure of how to proceed. Could it be a trick? Could these creatures, who had always been a symbol of pure aggression, actually be seeking help for their young? The Federation had experts study every inch of the transmission, every part of the data. They tracked the origin of the signal and confirmed its authenticity. Still, sending a human to Vordak Prime was a decision no one could take lightly. After much debate, a final decision was made. A single human would travel to the distant world and investigate the situation. But who would be brave or crazy enough to take such a dangerous mission? Many turned down the opportunity, as they rightly feared for their lives. The task would require someone with knowledge of dangerous animals, someone who could keep their wits in the face of fear, someone who understood the delicate balance between the creatures of the world. And then there was Leah Tran. She was not a soldier or a trained warrior. She was something far different, a caretaker. For years, Leah had worked with some of the most dangerous creatures known to humanity. She had raised tigers, wolves, and even experimental robotic creatures using her knowledge of biology, psychology, and animal behavior to care for them, keep them alive, and earn their trust. There was no one more qualified for this task, even if it sounded insane. Leah's love for animals, even the most dangerous, was what set her apart from everyone else. She had an uncanny ability to connect with creatures, to see beyond their ferocity and find the vulnerability hidden within. While others saw monsters, Leah saw living beings with hearts, minds, and emotions. It was this understanding that made her the perfect candidate to answer the mysterious request. When Leah was chosen, there were mixed feelings from the Federation. Some believed she was making a grave mistake, while others trusted her instincts. She spent the next few days preparing, gathering the necessary equipment, a few food rations, a medical kit, and most importantly, a voice recorder, in case she needed to document her experiences. She was given the best technology available, including a soft exosuit that would protect her from extreme environments. It was sleek and durable, capable of keeping her alive in the hostile environment of Vordak Prime. She did not bring weapons. Leah's approach was always about understanding, not confrontation. As she boarded the shuttle, the crew gave her uncertain looks. They knew that, in all likelihood, she was stepping into a dangerous unknown, one that could end her life in an instant. Still, Leah remained calm. She smiled and reassured them that she was not afraid. Deep inside, she knew the journey would be perilous, but she was also deeply curious. She had to know why the apex predators trusted humans with their young. What could they possibly see in humans that made them feel safe enough to send such a strange, vulnerable request? The journey to Vordak Prime was long and uneventful. The shuttle soared through the cold vacuum of space, and Leah spent most of the time reviewing the few details the Federation had gathered about the creatures. She had to remain calm, focused, and prepared for anything. But as the shuttle entered the atmosphere of Vordak Prime, Leah felt a sense of awe. The planet was nothing like Earth. Massive jungles and towering mountains stretched as far as the eye could see, with strange creatures and alien flora scattered throughout. The air was thick and humid, and the land seemed alive with tension. She had been briefed on the dangers, but nothing could prepare her for the first sight of the apex predators. As the shuttle landed in a clearing deep within the jungle, Leah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She stepped out into the wild, uncharted world, her heart pounding. Her breath came in slow, steady gasps. The ground beneath her was soft and spongy, the trees towering above her like ancient giants. The scent of the jungle filled her senses, a mixture of earth, decay, and something else, something wild and ancient. And then she saw them, the apex predators. They were as magnificent as they were terrifying, towering creatures with armored scales, sharp claws, and glowing eyes. They circled her, studying her every move. But Leah did not flinch. She did not run. She simply knelt, reaching into her bag to retrieve a soft thermal blanket and a bottle filled with warm nutrient milk. As she placed them on the ground, one of the cubs, small, vulnerable, and curious, approached her slowly. The growl of the adults in the background was deafening, but Leah didn't let it distract her. The cub sniffed the air, then cautiously licked the bottle. As it did, it let out a soft, satisfied purr, and the tension in the air seemed to fade, just a little. The leader of the apex predators stepped forward then, its massive form looming over Leah. It regarded her with its intense, glowing yellow eyes. Leah stood, meeting its gaze without hesitation. The creature spoke in a voice that was not heard with the ears, but felt deep in the mind. "You are the human?" it asked. Leah nodded. Slowly. "I am. My name is Leah." The creature lowered its head slightly, its gaze softening just enough to show that it was not an enemy. "Good. Our young are not safe here anymore. We need your help." The mission had just begun, and already Leah knew she was no longer just a caretaker. She was something much more. She was the key to their survival. Leah stood alone in the clearing, surrounded by the massive, towering creatures that had once been the stuff of nightmares. The apex predators, with their sleek, armored scales and glowing eyes, loomed over her like living mountains. Despite the intimidating sight, Leah felt a calmness wash over her, a strange sensation that she could not explain. It was as if the creatures could sense her lack of fear, her genuine desire to understand them, rather than treat them as mindless beasts to be feared or destroyed. Slowly, one of the cubs, still small and unsure, approached her cautiously. The adults watched closely, their sharp eyes never leaving Leah's every movement. Leah, however, was unfazed. She had dealt with dangerous animals before, though never quite like these. She lowered herself slowly to the ground, her movements deliberate and careful, ensuring she did not startle the young cub. It hesitated at first, sniffing the air cautiously, but the soothing warmth of the blanket and the scent of the nutrient milk soon enticed it. The cub shuffled closer, its small paws making soft thumping sounds as it moved toward the milk bottle. Leah had placed on the ground. She kept still, her eyes soft and calm, as the cub gently licked the bottle. A low purr rumbled from its chest, and Leah could not help but smile. She had seen animals form bonds with humans before, but this felt different. There was something sacred in the moment, something unspoken between her and the apex predators. Cub. The other cubs, initially shy and uncertain, soon began to gather around her. One by one, they approached cautiously, drawn to the warmth of the blanket and the promise of nourishment. They nuzzled her hands, licking her fingers and exploring the strange human presence that had entered their world. The adult apex predators remained still, watching the interaction with a mix of curiosity and wariness. It was clear they had never allowed a human so close to their young before, but there was something about Leah that seemed to ease their fears. Her actions were slow and deliberate, each movement aimed at gaining the trust of the creatures without pushing them too far. As the cubs continued to gather around her, Leah began to notice something that caught her attention. While the cubs were drawn to her warmth and the comfort she offered, there was a deeper, more troubling reason for the adults' watchfulness. The tension in the air was palpable, and Leah could feel the weight of their gazes on her. These creatures, though protective and attentive toward their young, were also fiercely territorial. They had not invited her here because they simply wanted company or a caretaker. No, there was something more urgent at play, something far more critical than Leah had initially realized. It was not long before one of the apex adults, the leader of the group, approached her once more. This time there was a different energy in the air, a sense of gravity that sent a chill down Leah's spine. The creature's massive scaled form moved with surprising grace, its every step causing the ground beneath Leah's feet to tremble. When it spoke, the voice was not heard aloud but reverberated deep within her mind, a telepathic message that seemed to echo through her very bones. "Our young are not safe here," the creature's voice said, heavy with unspoken sorrow. "A sickness has come upon them. A parasite unlike any we have ever encountered. It spreads fear and death, feeding on the fear that we cannot control." The words were a stark revelation, and Leah felt a sudden, overwhelming understanding. These creatures, so powerful and invincible in their own right, were not invulnerable to everything. There was something even the apex predators could not fight, Leader continued, its tone darkening with a sense of desperation. "We are immune to the parasite, but our young, they are not. They are fragile. They are afraid. And that fear makes them weak. It is killing them." The enormity of the situation struck Leah like a physical blow. These creatures, feared across the galaxy for their unmatched power, had been brought to their knees by something as simple as fear. The parasite, whatever it was, seemed to feed on that fear, spreading sickness among the young by amplifying their terror. It had become a silent, invisible killer that preyed upon the vulnerable. The apex predators, despite their terrifying strength, were helpless to protect their babies from it. The leader's voice, once commanding, now carried an unmistakable plea. "We do not ask for your strength," it said. "We do not need your weapons or your claws. We need your calm, your presence. The parasite does not seem to survive in the presence of your kind. We do not understand why, but it is true." Leah, though still in shock, nodded slowly. She had heard of such things before. Predators who feared certain species for unknown reasons. But this was different. The parasites didn't fear humans, per se. It was something about human energy, a calming presence that seemed to push the parasites away. It was a mystery, but one that Leah felt she had to solve if the cubs were to survive. She glanced at the young creatures huddled near her, each one looking up at her with wide, trusting eyes. She could feel their fear, their discomfort. and the strange, silent desperation that clung to the air. They needed her, and more than that, they needed to feel safe. The journey ahead would be fraught with danger, but for the first time, Leah understood the gravity of the mission she had taken on. This was not simply about caretaking, it was about survival, not just for the cubs, but for a species that, until now, had never relied on any other for help. She had no illusions about the dangers ahead. The jungle of Vordak Prime was a dangerous place, filled with predators that could tear through metal with ease, and the parasite was an enemy unlike any she had ever encountered. But despite the overwhelming odds, Leah felt a deep connection to the cubs. She had to help them. She had to find a way to calm them, to ease their fear, and to protect them from the invisible threat that loomed over them. As the night drew in, Leah gathered the cubs close, wrapping them in the warmth of the thermal blanket she had brought with her. She whispered softly to them, offering what little comfort she could. She wasn't sure how she would do it, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not leave Vordak Prime until the cubs were safe. The apex predators had trusted her with their young, and Leah would not let them down. The jungle of Vordak Prime had a strange, haunting beauty. Thick vines wrapped around towering trees, their roots twisting through the damp earth like serpents. The air was dense with the scent of damp foliage and the distant hum of insects that only added to the surreal atmosphere of the place. The apex predators had retreated into the shadows, their massive forms watching from a distance as Leah worked to care for their young. Night had fallen, and the jungle came alive with sounds that could easily unnerve anyone. Yet Leah had no choice but to continue, knowing that the creatures she tended to were too vulnerable to be left alone. The cubs, though initially fearful, had started to bond with her. They no longer looked at her with distrust, their sharp eyes softening as they huddled close to her warmth. They responded to her presence, nuzzling her hand, licking her fingers, and curling up next to her as though they had known her forever. Still, the situation was far from simple. The strange parasite that had begun to afflict them seemed to linger in the air, unseen but undeniably present, feeding off the young one's fear and sickness. It was an invisible, insidious force that crept into their minds, clouding their instincts and making them weak. Leah could see it in their eyes. There was a confusion, a fear that made them tremble, even as they were wrapped in her care. Despite her growing bond with the cubs, Leah knew this was just the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous task. Her mission was clear, but it was also increasingly complicated. The more she learned about the apex predators, the more she realized how little humanity understood about these creatures. The beasts had been a myth for so long, a legend in the minds of those who feared their strength. No one had ever bothered to understand them. They were simply seen as monsters, and that perception had been enough to keep people away. But Leah was here, and she had to see past that image, not just to help the cubs, but to uncover the truth about the parasite. What kind of sickness could bring these creatures to their knees? What was this invisible force? And why did it affect only the young? To answer those questions, Leah needed to observe and understand the behavior of these predators on a level that no human had ever achieved. The night passed in tense silence, the only sound the rustling of leaves as distant predators roamed through the jungle. Leah had set up a makeshift camp, keeping the cubs as close to her as possible, while the adult apex predators stood guard in the background. They didn't sleep, not truly. Their eyes never closed, always watching, ever vigilant. It was clear that their trust in her was not without reservation. They were still predators, and they never lowered their guard completely. Leah could feel the weight of their gaze, but she never faltered. She had to remain strong, for both the cubs and the adults. As the morning sun began to break through the thick canopy, casting a soft, golden light over the jungle, Leah took the opportunity to observe the cubs more closely. They were still sick. Despite the warmth, despite the comfort she offered, their condition had not improved. They ate, drank, and even played, but there was a lingering shadow of fear in their eyes, a fear that seemed to seep out of them and into the very air. That was when Leah first noticed something unusual. One of the cubs, the smallest of them all, had begun to shiver uncontrollably. Its small body was racked with tremors, and its once energetic movements had become sluggish, as though the very life force inside it was being drained away. Leah knelt beside it, her hands trembling as she gently stroked its fur. The creature's eyes were wide with terror, and its breathing was shallow, as though every breath was a struggle. Leah could feel the intensity of the fear radiating from the cub, and it struck her. This parasite, this invisible entity, wasn't just a physical sickness. It was a psychological one as well. The cubs were afraid, and that fear was what allowed the parasite to take hold. It fed on their fear, and the more afraid they became, the sicker they grew. Leah could see that now. The connection between the two was undeniable. The cub's emotional state was directly tied to the parasite's strength. But if fear fueled the parasite, then perhaps fear was also the key to defeating it. She thought back to the leader's words, to the strange claim that humans had a calming influence. She didn't fully understand why this was the case, but she had to test the theory. It wasn't just about providing food or shelter. It was about providing something deeper, something that could reach into the very heart of the cub's fear and calm it. Leah spent the next few hours working quietly, speaking softly to the cubs, touching them gently, trying to ease their anxiety. She had learned long ago that animals were highly attuned to emotions, and she believed that her calmness could have an impact on their state of mind. Slowly, one by one, the cubs stopped trembling. The smallest one, still shivering, began to settle as Leah spoke to it in a low, soothing voice, her words gentle but firm. She kept her breathing steady, each inhale and exhale a rhythm that she hoped they could latch onto. Slowly but surely, the tremors began to fade. The cub's body relaxed, and its fearful eyes softened. It wasn't an immediate fix, but it was a start. Leah knew she couldn't solve everything at once, but she had made progress. The parasite had not completely left, but perhaps, just perhaps, she had found a way to fight it. Her heart raced with a mix of hope and uncertainty. She had a long way to go, and there was still much to learn about the nature of this parasite. But one thing was clear. She had gained the trust of the cubs, and that trust had given her a foothold in the fight for their survival. As the day wore on, Leah could sense the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The apex adults who had been watching from the shadows began to move closer. They still kept their distance, but their posture had relaxed slightly. They no longer watched her with the same wariness they had the night before. They were beginning to trust her as well. Leah could feel their eyes on her, and while she could not hear their thoughts, she had an undeniable sense that they were observing her every move. There was no mistaking the intensity of their gaze, but there was something different about it now. The sense of fear had softened, replaced by something else, perhaps curiosity, perhaps hope. For the first time, Leah realized that these apex predators, these creatures that were once seen as ruthless killers, were not so different from the animals she had worked with back on Earth. They were capable of trust, of vulnerability, and of care. They were not monsters. They were living beings, just like any other. And with that realization, Leah's resolve grew stronger. She was not just here to protect the cubs. She was here to bridge the gap between two worlds, to understand a species that no one else had even tried to understand. If she could do that, if she could help these creatures survive, then maybe the galaxy would learn something valuable, a lesson that not all creatures should be feared. Some simply needed a chance to be understood. The dense, misty jungle of Vordak Prime had grown quieter in the days since Leah's first encounter with the apex predators. The cubs, though still fragile, had shown remarkable improvement under her care. Each day, their energy returned, their fear slowly being replaced by curiosity and trust. It was an uphill battle, but Leah had learned more than she ever expected in those few days. The parasite, the unseen force that had so ruthlessly weakened the cubs, was not merely a sickness of the body, it was a sickness of the mind, a parasite of fear. The more the cubs trembled, the stronger it grew. It thrived on their emotional turmoil, creeping into their thoughts and weakening them from within. Despite the horror of it all, there was something deeply fascinating about the nature of this parasite, how it fed off the most primal emotion, fear, and how it could be fought not with strength, but with calm. With each passing day, Leah had made subtle progress. She had spoken to the cubs, soothing them with her words and gestures, but that wasn't all. The connection between herself and the cubs had deepened. The young creatures, once fearful and distrustful, now sought her out for comfort. They no longer hesitated to approach her. They nuzzled into her touch, seeking warmth and reassurance. As Leah worked, she couldn't ignore the larger picture, though. The apex predators, those towering, majestic creatures that had long been considered the deadliest beings in the galaxy, watched closely from the shadows. They hadn't revealed much of themselves, remaining aloof, yet their presence was undeniable. Leah had often caught their gaze, a mix of curiosity and quiet respect in their eyes. They were no longer merely observing her as a potential threat. Something had changed. That change became more evident as the days wore on. One evening, as the sun dipped below the treetops, casting the jungle in shades of crimson and gold, Leah was tending to the cubs when she felt it. A shift in the air, as though the very atmosphere had changed. She had become attuned to the subtle movements of the jungle, its rhythms, and its life. Something was different. Something was about to happen. And then, it did. The largest of the apex predators, the alpha, approached her slowly, its massive form emerging from the shadows. The ground trembled slightly with each of its steps, the earth reverberating with the power of its presence. Leah froze, not out of fear, but in awe. The creature's eyes, sharp and piercing, met hers, and for the first time since she had arrived, it seemed as if the predator was trying to communicate something. The alpha's gaze lingered on her for a long moment, and in those eyes, Leah saw something she hadn't expected, a quiet plea. This was not just a test of strength. This was a test of something deeper. The alpha was seeking something more than just protection for its young. It was seeking understanding. For all their raw power, these creatures were not invincible. They too had fears, and they too sought reassurance. Leah felt an overwhelming sense of connection to the alpha in that moment. She had crossed the invisible barrier between fear and trust, not just with the cubs, but with the alpha itself. The silence between them stretched, the jungle around them holding its breath. Leah took a tentative step forward, her movement slow and deliberate. She had no words for this moment. There was nothing she could say, but she didn't need to. She had learned that actions spoke louder than words, and her actions so far had conveyed a message of trust, of care, and of understanding. With one hand outstretched, she offered the alpha a gesture of peace, a sign of goodwill, and perhaps, in that moment, a bond. The alpha stopped before her, towering over her in a way that could have been intimidating, but Leah felt no fear. It lowered its head, its eyes never leaving hers, and with a deep, rumbling sound, it made a soft, almost imperceptible nod. Leah's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment when the predator, once feared by all, had chosen to accept her as... If on cue, the other apex predators began to approach. Slowly, cautiously, they circled Leah, their massive bodies surrounding her and the cubs. There was no aggression in their movements. Instead, there was a strange reverence. Leah felt their eyes on her, studying her, and for the first time, she realized that these creatures were not just predators, they were protectors. They were willing to trust her with their most vulnerable, their young. The realization was both humbling and overwhelming. These creatures, whose strength was legendary, had come to see her as something more than a human. They had come to see her as an ally, a part of their pack, however unlikely that may have seemed at first. The cubs, who had once cowered in fear, now began to play more freely, their energy returning in full force. They chased each other through the underbrush, their tiny bodies tumbling over each other in excitement. Leah couldn't help but smile. She had succeeded. She had earned their trust, and in doing so, she had discovered something far more profound than she could have ever anticipated. The bond between humans and these apex predators was not one of dominance or fear. It was one of mutual respect, built on understanding and empathy. These creatures, once thought to be nothing more than vicious killers, had a complexity that most had never stopped to consider. They had their own form of wisdom, their own way of seeing the world. And now, they had shared that with her. But the journey wasn't over. Leah still had to confront the parasite, the silent enemy that had threatened to destroy these magnificent creatures. The bond she had formed with the cubs and the alpha had given her hope, but it wasn't enough to eradicate the sickness. There was still work to be done. The parasite had grown stronger as the cubs had weakened, and now it seemed more persistent than ever. Yet Leah was not afraid. The connection she had built with the apex predators, the trust she had earned, gave her the strength to keep going. She knew now that she wasn't alone in this. The predators, for all their strength, had their own vulnerabilities. But they had also shown her that they had the capacity for change, for growth. And she would fight alongside them, not as a healer, but as a partner. The days ahead would be difficult. The parasite was still a formidable foe, and the jungle held many dangers, both seen and unseen. But Leah had learned something invaluable, that the true power of these apex predators lay not in their might, but in their capacity for connection. They had allowed her into their world, trusted her with their young, and together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The truth, Leah realized, was that the apex predators didn't simply trust humans with their babies because of their strength or dominance. They trusted because humans, like them, had the power to understand, to care, and to protect. In that shared strength, they had found a bond that transcended species, a connection that could not be broken. And that was the truth behind why apex predators trusted humans with their babies.